This video is sponsored by the Great Courses Plus. It's a service where you have instantaneous access to lectures by top professors. One of these lectures actually inspired the creation of this video, so stay tuned till the end of the video to find out more. Ancient Egypt. You got pyramids, pharaohs, and even Ra, our favorite sun god. Well shucks, who wouldn't like you guys? Oh, yeah. Ever since Egypt was lost to the literal sands of time, there was this mysterious legacy left behind that intrigued cultures for generations. Who were these people? It's those unanswered questions that captivated philosophers and invaders alike. In my opinion, the history of this fascination with Egypt is just as interesting as the history of Egypt itself. So our story begins in the last era of ancient Egypt, when it really died. Which is odd to think about. Egypt lasted 3,000 years before any Greeks ever gave an opinion on it. It'd be like America lasting until 5776 AD, and only then, 3,000 years from us today, would people record their opinion on the USA. Yes, I know the Old Testament has a lot to say, but I'll talk about Exodus later. The story has to begin somewhere, so let's start with the death of Alexander the Great. Why is that? Let's just say Alexander's empire plus Egypt plus death equals one of his generals now ruling Egypt. The new Greek rulers controlled the Ptolemaic kingdom of Egypt in 300 BC. They did everything they could to appear like the old pharaohs, built temples for the old gods, depicted themselves like pharaohs of the past 3 millennia, and even married their own siblings. That's commitment. For 300 years, there was a Greek-Egyptian hybrid ruling class that dominated Egyptian society, and it remained pretty isolated from the native majority. Cleopatra VII, who was a part of that class, never learned the native language or left the capital city of Alexandria. Long story short, Cleopatra dies and the Romans ruled Egypt in 30 BC. Much like the Greeks, the Romans liked the idea of Egypt, but not really the native culture itself. There was even a phrase, ex Africa semper aliquid novid, or there's always something new from Africa, symbolic of how Egypt was Rome's access to a strange world. But just because Rome viewed the region as interesting, the view on the culture was another story. I mean, look at the Gauls, the Britons, Jews, even Jesus. Rome wasn't the most tolerant society. Egypt-Rome was heavily segregated. The Roman-preferred Greeks were the ruling class, while majority Egyptians were simply ignored and disliked. To Rome, Egypt was just a weird culture who liked cats a lot. When Rome fell and the Muslims invaded, Europe just kind of forgot about Egypt. The only stories of Egypt at all were from the Bible stories of Exodus, how Moses defied the Pharaoh and led his people to freedom. Now imagine if you were a peasant in medieval France. You've never seen a picture of the hieroglyphs, or the pyramids, never heard of the Old Kingdom or New. The only story you will ever hear of this faraway place called Egypt is in the Old Testament, where they enslaved God's chosen people. Of course, you're not going to have a fond opinion of ancient Egypt, and that's what the common conception was. In the Middle Ages, the Pharaoh was history's greatest villain. Not that you'd actually know what the Pharaoh of Egypt looked like, which was why drawings depicting Exodus were not the most accurate. The Middle Ages didn't last forever, and Egypt didn't remain depicted like that, because Europeans traveled again. Egypt, however, was still a mystery to the West. The Muslim conquest pretty much split communication with the region since the time of the Byzantines, 1,000 years. By this time, there was more knowledge about Egypt. The pyramid was a popular symbol, even used in the seal of the United States, meaning the longevity of the new nation. But Egypt itself wasn't really seen as special at the time, until one single man, opened the floodgates. A young, enthusiastic General Napoleon Bonaparte. It's 1798, and France and Great Britain, as usual, hate each other. To weaken the British, Napoleon wants to hurt their economy by attacking their trade to India, so he goes after Egypt. Long story short, let's invade! It goes horribly. But before everybody dies, the soldiers of Napoleon's army discovered a stone tablet that had both ancient Greek writing and Egyptian hieroglyphics. Going back a few thousand years to Ptolemy's kingdom, the ruling class needed both Greek and hieroglyphic writings to govern their region, so they made a tablet that had translations of words from Egyptian symbols to Greek writing. This was the Rosetta Stone, and it was the missing link that allowed people to understand finally what these symbols meant. And everybody wanted to learn more and see more about Egypt. Except Napoleon. He sailed away as his troops died of plague. In the early 19th century, every Western country wanted to be as grand as the ancient Egyptians. It was a craze, and they reflected this in their new buildings and even cities. It's no coincidence Memphis, the capital city of ancient Egypt, located on a great river, and Memphis, Tennessee, also located on a great river, share the same name. Egyptian in the early 1800s meant grandiose. There were so many new buildings inspired by ancient architecture, this phrase has a name: Egyptian revivalism. People from America to Russia romanticized Egypt as the perfect civilization to marvel at. New discoveries and translations could happen at any time. Definitely exciting stuff. By the 1880s, the British Empire, not the Ottomans or the French, took control of Egypt. While still subject to discovery, ancient Egypt was no longer the trendy topic it was 80 years prior. Archaeologists made discoveries, but the general public just wasn't as interested anymore. Well, that was until 1922. In the Valley of Kings, a pharaoh's tomb was found in amazing condition. While not untouched by robbers, it was still a time capsule into Egyptian culture. This was the tomb of King Tutankhamun. Made pharaoh as a child, the tomb contained the now famous mask. It was the start of a new era of Egyptian fascination. However, the story didn't stop there. Soon after opening the tomb, Lord Carnarvon, who funded the project, died from an infected mosquito bite. Following this were more deaths from the team who discovered the tomb. Some died from strange illnesses, some from murder. Many labeled this was a result of a curse from the mummy's tomb, while some, but not many at all, tombs were labeled with tablets reciting threats to those who disturbed the final resting place. King's Tut's did not. Some of the deaths could be attributed to coincidence. Some claim infections that were unrecognizable to modern people lie dormant within the tomb. Either way, only 9 of the 50 or so people on the team died within the preceding decade. It made for a good story though, and mummies went from burial ritual to supernatural beast. Mummies already had a bit of a negative connotation. They were preserved dead bodies first and foremost, and it made them pretty easy to be wary of. The 1911 film The Mummy, not the Boris Karloff one, had the reanimation of a mummy through electricity and whatnot. The 1932 The Mummy, yes, the Boris Karloff one, was about a mummy who came back to life. Throughout the 20th century, a number of films capitalized on the mystery of ancient Egypt. It was a perfect region to set your mystery and/or horror film in. Then, Cleopatra came along. It was so outlandishly expensive that even great box office numbers did nothing to recapture the costs, effectively killing the ancient Egyptian craze in Hollywood until, let's not talk about that. In the scale of 2 millennia, the West's fascination with ancient Egypt is a story in itself. The idea towards this lost civilization, I feel, can be symbolic of what our society valued at the time. For Rome and Greece, it was just a conquest. For medieval Europe, it was biblical villains, and for enlightened Europe, it was inspiration for their own imperial ambitions. But today, I feel Egypt is still interesting because it will always be shrouded by mystery. It's something distinct that seems to have always existed and will never be replicated again. And because of that, everyone around the world will be captivated by Egypt for thousands of years to come. This video was inspired by a lecture which was featured in the video service The Great Courses Plus, History of Ancient Egypt, taught by Professor Bob Breer. Here he discusses the general history of Egypt in detail throughout the 3 millennia of its existence. You can access this and many numerous courses through the Great Courses Plus. It's a subscription on-demand video learning service with over 8,000 video lectures taught by professors in basically every field. Topics like history, science, math, and even really specific and odd topics that continue to always be updated, like photography. Courses are sometimes even hosted by National Geographic and the Smithsonian. It removes the pressure of grades from college. All you have to do is just watch and listen. So if you want to learn more about the ancient Egyptians, click on this link to get 1 month of unlimited access to courses and videos absolutely free. Just visit thegreatcoursesplus.com/knowledge. The link is provided in the description below. This is Cody of Knowledge Hub.